this meeting of the Risk and Assurance Committee. I'll just ask Janine to lead us in a karakia. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te atakura, hei tio, hei huka, hei hauhu, tihei, Māori order.
We have apologies from Councillor Story and Mayor. Are there any further ones? I have a mover and seconder. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Bruce. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Confirmation of agenda. So we have resolution there that the agenda as circulated be confirmed as the business of this meeting. The order as set out in the minutes, and the meeting may sit longer than 2 hours continuously. Do I have a mover and second of that, please? Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Angela. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. Moving on then to the, I just draw your attention to page 6, the emergency evacuation procedures. They're the same as always, but just to note those. We now move on to any update for disclosures of interest.
If we discuss the RMA reforms, just note that I'm acting chair of the EPA. So on Tuesday, I'll be deputy chair.
Right. If we can just note that, I don't think it'll be a problem. Okay. And confirmation of the minutes of the meeting on the 4th of December. We have a mover and seconder. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Angela. All those in favour say aye. The contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. Which moves us on to matters arising. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a report provided there for you. Questions or matters that have come forward for further action from previous meetings. I think in large these have been addressed with a couple of those, obviously the update on in-full benefit realisation, as well as comparison between sick leave and EAP utilisation included within today's agenda. Just note in terms of item 4, the feedback and complaints, there's a proposed approach to how we may do that in the absence of any council to council benchmarks, but utilising the information that's available via the Ombudsman, I guess just to show how against public sector we are performing in that space. That will continue to be reported to you on an annual basis.
Okay. Any questions? If not, can we have a mover and seconder to receive that report? Paul, thank you. Chris, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Risk. Work plan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just with this being the first meeting of the year, laying out the standard work plan for the committee. Probably one key point to note in there is in relation to the internal audit program. As the committee will be aware, we have a change in internal audit service provider. The new team from PwC will be in attendance at this morning's meeting. But in light of that, there is the opportunity to review and refresh our approach to internal audit alongside work that will be done on reviewing council's overall strategy, strategic direction, risks and priorities. So working through with the PwC team, and there's some information in there in the agenda further on around a proposed approach as to how that may happen, both over the next 6 months, but then also a program of work with the new council post October. So that space in particular is a little bit fluid. We will work obviously with you and with PwC on the formation of that internal audit work program.
Thank you. Any questions? Chris?
Yeah, Graham, really just for Janine, and I guess whether it should be handled here at Finance, but I just want to make sure that the plan for completion of this year's audit, government audit, is such that we've got enough breathing space at the end of it, because we're going to be breaking as end of the triennium.
Yes.
So I'd like to think that we can complete that process before that. I know it's possible to hold meetings after that, so entirely in your hands, but I'd just like to be confirmed that that's actually in hand and timetable such that we'll meet those objectives.
So through the chair, if I can indicate, what we have signalled to Audit New Zealand is actually that we won't complete the audit prior to the election. That would mean that we've got sign off at council at the end of September. That I just don't think we're going to be in the position to be able to do that. What we do need to do though is a way that effectively we can do a handshake from this council to the new one. And I think the chair of this committee plays a key role in that from a continuity perspective. So the intention at the moment is that we can put a report to the September council meeting, which will be the last time that the current council meets, in terms of the status of the annual report at that point in time, with a recommendation, hopefully, from that meeting into the new council, acknowledging that one of the first jobs that new council will have to do is to actually adopt an annual report, which has been overseen by a previous governing body.
That's a fairly common practice where they don't get them completed before the election, and you just need to do the process to make sure that there's a smooth transition.
Okay, thanks. The main thing, I guess, Graham, from your perspective, is that the management letter is picked up in action.
Yes.
That's the main benefit of having an audit at the end of the day.
Yes. Well, I think, and we can discuss this with the new appointed auditor who will be here later on this morning. But we should make sure there's a verbal update before they prepare that letter and deliver it, so that the outgoing council can be aware of what's being raised in the audit process, which will be, I think by that time, would be substantially completed. There'll be just some outstanding parts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I agree. So we need a mover and seconder. Thank you, Chris. Angela, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Risk management activity update.
So through the chair, perhaps if and have the chief executive present his views on those current and emerging risks, which obviously the landscape has changed just a little bit since the agenda was prepared. So,
Welcome, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I had the pleasure of being on leave for a couple of weeks and being overseas recently, and it's always quite good looking back from afar and kind of looking at things in a slightly different context when you're not in the thick and midst of everything. And certainly, one of the things that I was noticing there is I was reading some of the paper headlines, and in Australia they were sort of concerned about the geopolitical, how's the rest of the world decisions that have been made in some parts of the world going to affect them, because they felt quite largely implicated for it. Similar sort of feeling to here. You read other things in the newspaper about the economy there, lots of concerns about it, high inflation, high interest rates. It's having a lot of negative impacts. They were talking about energy crises. They were talking about gas supply. They were talking about the ability of Australia to meet peak electricity demand. But seriously, I felt like I was reading something I'd just read in New Zealand before I'd left, which just reminded me that a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in this country, some of the things that are very pertinent to our region and this council, are the same things that are happening all around the world. It's whilst our media makes it look like it's often it's our issue, actually it's these are global issues. So it's kind of a good reminder to look from afar and what that looks like. So clearly, what's happening around the world, we've seen that it can be quite disruptive. We've seen that it can have quite rapid impacts on how our economy operates, and if it affects export markets, it particularly affects this regional economy. So it's kind of interest, I think, in terms of risks for our council. I guess if we look closer to home and some of what's happening nationally, we're in a period where the national election cycle, where the government's going to try and do things at pace, to get runs on the board. They've said that, and we've started to see some of this play out. So we can expect the environment that we work in, that affect a lot of our core services, to change, or for signal to change anyway. We know that it's being signalled in the local government space, changes to the Act in terms of wellbeings that are signalled. We know that the government's saying that they want local government to focus on core services, whatever that means. That we know that they're talking about potential rate capping, like has been used overseas in Australia. We know there's lots of lessons that can be learned about that. And we know that they're talking about performance benchmarking. Now, all these things will come and hit us at some point. I actually think our council's in quite a good space to deal with a lot of this, because I don't think that we're kind of words companies superfluous in any way, and so but we can expect these changes to come through in a lot of discussion. In the transport space, we've already seen with the previous minister, Simeon Brown, bring things in like not funding new services for PT, and we had those in our budgets to increase our PT services. We've seen things around the private share, our expectations for us to increase in that space, and we've been trying to accommodate that already. We've seen other things around speed limits and other parts of legislation, quite radical changes. We now have a new minister, Minister Bishop, who's supporting some of these things, but also is saying, okay, I need to understand the intent of what those previous decisions were. So it's kind of it's a little bit of a fluid space, and it's quite difficult when you're in the middle of annual planning to try and know how to land some of these things. Civil defence space, I think we hear lots about governments wanting to take up learnings from the past and change things. We just don't know what they are. So we kind of continue as usual. But I guess the big one that's hit just recently is the resource management space. And the things that I've kind of on my mind and I've noticed about that is they're clearly going to, it's fairly similar to what Labor had proposed, but without some of what I call the bureaucracy of how to achieve some of the changes on top. The planning space, they're talking about having a spatial plan. This council's already been doing some work preparing for spatial planning to try and get a regional strategy in place, and it's been talking with our local government partners. That's going to require 12 pieces of local government to come together to produce a spatial plan. Some of the work we did in the regional deal space probably also assists us there. But the spatial plan is going to concentrate on what people can do, where you can do what. We've heard about trying to take 1,100 different sort of planning zones in the country and get it down to about 12. There's a lot of common sense about how to streamline stuff in here, which would be quite supportive of. But our council will have the sole responsibility of putting together an environment plan. And so that will be transitioning probably our existing plan into a new form. They're talking about getting rid of regional policy statements and so on. So we'll work through that. I think we're in a good space to be able to do it. We're in the midst of hearings about our coastal plan at the moment. So, you know, we'll have some things which are going to be more modern and up to date. How the system works between an infrastructure plan that is very enabling and an environment plan that the government says is kind of based on protection of environment and natural resources will be interesting to see the direction it gives, because the government has said they're going to give very clear national policy direction. Get rid of some of the national policy statements, but have simple statements and national policy direction. So we look forward to that space. They talk about they're going to provide tools on how to allocate resources. And for regions, including ours, where in some parts, resources are over-allocated, be it water, be it nutrients, we look forward to those tools on how to deal with it. That will bring up other issues, for instance, the iwi rights and interests in water that they've signalled for decades. They've talked about national direction. They've also talked about regions being able to put their own limits in place. That's sensible, because in the previous renditions of some national direction, we were going to have to impose limits that might have been, say, appropriate for Canterbury in waterways, but were in no way applicable to our rivers and streams and systems. So there's a lot of common sense around that. How the system allows for our iwi partners to be involved, what the transition arrangements from existing arrangements are into a new system. We'll be interested to watch that space. I heard on the radio the other day they're asking that Labor has been asked to provide bipartisan support for this. They said at a high level we would, but there was a second part to it where the letter they'd received was, but there'll be no compromise. And I don't think the Labor government felt, well, if you ask for bipartisan support, there's always compromise to get the support. So I guess we'll be watching that space. And possibly the other thing in there that probably affects this council and our services, there's discussion about who will be providing compliance, monitoring and enforcement responsibilities. When you read the Cabinet decision paper, where Cabinet had taken this expert advisory panel and gone approve, 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 on that CME space, it had approved, what Cabinet approved was to not proceed with it. They approved not proceeding with it at the moment to go into legislation changes and write-up. But what they did say is they'd have this parallel work program to try and work that out. Now, if you go into the expert advisory panel document, I understand it's a very, very good document. And in there, it's talking about probably a little bit about inconsistency across regions. It's talking about territorial authority functions and their probably lack of doing a lot of CME in this sort of space. It's talking about maybe having a national regulator of regional hubs. It's not going to get written into the legislation at this stage. And of course, of all these things, the devil's in the detail of what ends up in legislation, which we won't see until it won't be finalised till just before the next election, if the government can work at pace. Then there'll be transition times in the future. But that CME space is something that the regional sector and I've got a personal interest in and will be staying closer to. So I think the resource management space, part of our core activity, transport, very much part of our core activity. We are part of local government, so part of our core activity. Civil defence, that's some of the things I'm keeping a pretty close eye on. And I think that's the sort of thing that we'd probably be wanting to make sure our council's positioned for and agile for in the next few years, and probably something that I think this committee is just going to have to keep an eye on as well.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions of the CEO? Bruce.
Yeah, I got one. Chris, how quickly do you think they're going to be able to develop environmental limits, which is a key cornerstone of the new Environment Act?
It's an interesting discussion about environment limits if you say, well, who? Because at the moment we've got all the CRI restructuring going on, because where some of the expertise is, and we don't know what the fallout of that's all going to be. And they also talk about regions being able to set limits too, but we need that differentiation of where's the government going to play in the national space in terms of direction and what they leave to regions. I don't know what the answer to that is. You want me to,
Talking about uncertainty, that's a major area of uncertainty. And I can't see that even if you started work on it today, that's a several-year job, because getting agreement around environmental limits has in the past always been the sticking point.
Right. No other questions, Chris? Okay. Who's going to take us through the deep dives?
Yeah, so I will cover those off. So obviously two deep dives undertaken for this quarter. The first one across both, no proposed change to the risk rating. In terms of health and safety, probably just the call outs there are around the appropriately skilled staff actually operating at all levels within, I guess, the health and safety system nationally, in noting their WorkSafe's own strategic objectives and the ability to meet those. Cascading that down in terms of the organisation and the clear understanding by our staff of their roles and responsibilities, both personal safety, but in terms of our people leaders, understanding that. So we have a number of training programs that are in place to assist with that. And there's a little bit further information in that regard in the internal audit report in relation to the survey tool that's been undertaken across the organisation in advance of the Safe Plus audit that's about to commence in May. So some further insights there. In terms of controls, probably a couple of key areas. So really in that psychosocial safety space, of a couple of new programs that have been introduced as part of our learning and development, both Good Yarns, which is having appropriate conversations around mental health and wellbeing, as well as the research building personal resilience. What's important to people, coming from a values perspective, what your response in certain situations is, and the support structures that you need to have in place to actually protect that wellbeing or understand where your triggers may be. So I've actually personally done both of those courses, and they're fantastic. Are there any, if I pause on health and safety maybe, and then move to just the climate change risk?
Questions, Paul?
Yeah, so reflecting on Ports of Auckland.
Yes. Yep.
A litigation. So I see there's some wonderful work going here, and I'm impressed it's good. One of the question that came up in the Ports of Auckland is assurance that critical controls, in respect of issues that could lead to death or harm, are actually being followed. So we identify the risks and we review them every year. This is good. And if I look at the comments in the assurance plan, second line of defence, it sort of talks about review systems and controls, but the core point is you have to audit them and provide evidence that they're actually being followed. And I'm sure we have Gemba walks and all the stuff going on, but it's kind of not reflected directly in here from what I could read. So it's that assurance level that we're actually ticking off and making sure the controls are being followed by the people at risk.
Through Mr. Chair, I think that's a really good point.
Mm.
And so I think it needs to be reflected in there. And we do it. And just to give you some assurance that we do those assurance checks, an example I can give is we've had to stop some contractors working due to how they work at height and how they build cofferdams, where we often are doing rebuilding flood pump areas. We've identified that the practices that contractors were using weren't up to scratch. We've stopped work and we've until things have been put in place that we're satisfied with. And that's gone a little bit deeper about how we're even letting the contracts in the first place. Often people can say, this is my plan, and you can tick it off, but it's actually making sure they are working to their plan, which is the critical point, which I think is your assurance piece that goes with it. So we are doing that. We've got quite a big effort, and in fact, our people and capability lead has taken it on as a critical role, because that's Stu Brown, to make sure we're leading this to put these assurance things in place. But I take your point. I think it needs to be very clear in here that this is what we are doing.
Yes, that's great to hear, and particularly the overlapping PCBU, because that's the bit that I know other entities haven't got as well organised, and so to hear those stories is just fantastic. But yeah, we definitely need a line in here.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we also got a Safe Plus audit coming up later in the year, which is probably going to have a look at this. We're just preparing a due diligence plan right now, effectively in response to that Port of Auckland type of matters that talk about what our due diligence is as officers, because given that might well reach down further into the executive, everybody like to put me on a pedestal and say, well, I'm it. I'm now going, nah, it's going a bit further. And even the sort of sacrosanct area of local government governance and whether they're part of PCBU or not, you know, as long as the governance is doing its job, they're probably squeaky clean. But you know, I don't think anything's as sacrosanct as it used to look like.
So through the chair, I mean, I think one of the things that we've talked about previously is providing the independent members of this committee a copy of the health and safety report that council also receives, which is probably where some of these deep dives and certainly recent legislative events are canvassed. So I'll take an action again to make sure that you are seeing that, so you sort of just build out that broader picture from an overall governance perspective as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, look, just to pick up on what Paul made about the Ports of Auckland, I understand the defendant is taking that back to court. And from what I'm told, there's some significant contributory negligence by the person who was killed, unfortunately. And that's been confirmed to me by somebody who was on site at the time. So I think there's more to play out there. It's not, you know, while the CE was made to look like the person responsible, you might find under appeal that that's going to change, but who knows? But that's up to the court.
Janine, can I just ask a question? The Safe Plus internal audit, that's going to be undertaken by external
Yes.
independents?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so that has been contracted. So by Impact, I think is the name of the organisation. I say prior to that review being undertaken, there has been a survey tool that's been provided and applied across, I think, our integrated catchment management, resource use and science policy and information directorates to get some early insight into some of the responses in there, which is helping to inform, I guess, a plan in advance of that review as well. So I think that plan or response to the survey results has been requested to come back through the executive team in the next couple of weeks.
Good. Thank you.
The other deep dive is in relation to climate change, and obviously the risk is around council not appropriately considering the impact of climate change through its planning and decision making processes. So there's a couple of areas of new risk that staff have called out through these conversations, and it's around the use of emerging tech. But with that increasing misinformation, disinformation, in terms of, I guess, community understanding and knowledge of what's actually happening out there. But also the application of those new technologies in terms of how we respond around our community resilience programs as well. Overall, commentary is that controls are effective. Obviously, we have our Climate Action Committee who act as connectors in terms of the program of work across the organisation, making sure that that's all aligned and harmonious. So, yeah, happy to take any questions on that one.
Jennifer.
Thanks. No, it looks really good, and after so many years now of watching this one come every year, I've got my head around what it's really trying to do in context of the larger picture. And look, I'm really proud of what we have achieved in this space over the last 5 years. I think it's a great foundation where the pace of change was largely going to be dependent on people's will, political will, and just the abilities we have in the organisation. I do want to challenge that we might want to think a bit broader. Now, I kind of raised this in some ways before, but the reason I'm bringing it up again is because I'm coming across other things in the news and such, and other climate managers out there. And so the climate topic is hyped up to be, no, that's not the right word. The climate topic is very popular for organizations to tackle, but the ecosystem health side of things is equally, if not more important, because the climate part is only one part of that bigger picture. And I would challenge, and I'll certainly do this if I come back next trinium, to get it into our strategy that we think about that bigger picture. And so I wonder whether through this committee, of the one or so meetings we still have, whether we could explore through a report what that could look like to expand this climate risk to be broader. I mean, maybe there's a case for having a separate one, but I think it could easily be merged together. Because I also noticed, so there's two parts. One is we mention in our LTPs a whole lot of assumptions about the long-term and ecosystem breakdown, but we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it. And so when I come across things in the news, like just in January, the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries, which usually focus a lot on financial solvency, issued a report called Planetary Solvency, Finding Our Balance with Nature. And they essentially criticize the dominant economic theory that governments use for just focusing too much on what we can take and doesn't account for enough real risks of how we degrade nature for society to flourish. And so they had quite a big bit of news there that the headline was global economy could face 50% loss in GDP, not just GDP growth, but in GDP globally, between 2070 and 2090 from climate shocks and ecosystem breakdown. And so I realize that that report is largely focused towards international, national collaboration again, but I'm just mindful we do the 100-year plans with our communities in that resilience space. We do 50-year planning for infrastructure. The 2070, if there was a 50% loss in GDP, quite significant on how we as an organisation would respond to that. So the challenge is to think long term, but I think they're fairly conservative agency that's coming out with this, that's putting the challenge forward. How do we consider that in some way? And could we build that just to start building a foundation to get that ecosystem health in? Is there something you could bring back or something we could explore somewhere?
Yeah.
I'm mindful it also goes from the TCFD to the TNFD progression that organisations go under. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm conscious of the fact that I guess that whole strategic risk conversation is something that we are, setting up a program of work to do in light of the strategy, and it needs to be sort of led by the strategy. So I think we will absolutely be doing that and can take that through.
It's just the
Probably
when
ne-
and how.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so we've got the PwC team in the room now, so great for them to be hearing this discussion. How far in advance of those conversations we get with some thinking in this space, and
we
obviously
have a
you're probably
strategy.
doing a lot
Yeah.
through the Climate Action Committee as well. I think in terms of our response, it's always going to be within a global context,
Yep.
but what is the action that we can actually be taking?
Yeah.
So that's the controllable elements that we have.
Especially in the environmental
Yeah.
monitoring policy regulatory space.
Yeah.
Where equally you could apply the entire climate change risk description and just replace climate change with ecosystem health.
Yep.
Where we might be judged on not doing enough about emerging contaminants or anything like
Yeah,
that.
and so I think that it does come back to strategic direction
Cool.
in terms of objectives, but then what are the goals? So what does the strategy want to achieve? But then what are we going to do, and how do we measure how we're being successful towards that? And that's the whole conversation that obviously Karen Bennett is starting to do a whole lot of thinking in that space right now. Yeah.
So I've flagged it, you've heard
Yep.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've captured it.
Appreciate it. Maybe it can expand at some point as the.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Great.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I can't support that. I think there's going to be significant developments coming out of Wellington. I certainly want to make sure that we don't waste ratepayers' monies getting ahead of the national directives in terms of climate change. The climate's always changing, nobody's denying that. And for us to be presupposing what's going to be happening and wasting ratepayers' money on that, I'm vehemently opposed to. So I just want to record that. Thanks.
Okay. I can also send a good report from the OECD from just a few months ago, which says that it will tackling climate crisis will increase economic growth quite substantially. So it goes both ways. Yeah.
Any further questions? Bruce.
I just wanted to make a comment on, I appreciate Jennifer's international global approach, but I'd also warn about the regional scale issue under the uncertainties that our CE has just outlined and the potential for environmental crises of all sorts, because what's going on at the moment is people are standing back, people are using opportunities of lesser scrutiny to get away with stuff. We are lowering the bar. Just a little warning on the regional scale about risk and assurance, risk, environmental risk. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I'm only trying to translate things that you learn into how it could be relevant to regional level. So not wanting to go over and above, just wanting to make sure we're responsible. Thanks.
Thank you. If there are no,
If I could just comment, it's up to council to decide what it wants to do. I'm not going to have a view at all, but Chris, it's beyond climate change though. It's biodiversity, it's the whole environment that has to be thought about. Now, where's the right place to think about it, and do you need to spend taxpayers' ratepayer money? Well, that's for you to decide.
right. If there are no further questions, can we have a mover and seconder to receive this report, please?
Better move.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Chris. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Internal audit activity update.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do have the KPMG team online in terms of presenting their final report to us. So thanks, Benita, for making the time to join us today. We had, as I'm sure members can remember, a bit of a technology failure at our last meeting. So despite best efforts, we weren't able to close this one out. But perhaps if we start with that, the rest of the report is a bit of a recap on the status of previous audits that have been completed. But hand over to the
Thank
PwC, KPMG team.
Welcome.
Morena, and thank you. So Benita Nund, and I'm also joined by Timothy Brown, who's a director in the team. I'll take the report as read, but just highlight a few key things. Going back to the original intent of the plan when it was approved by the committee, we were engaged to perform a review of the capability, capacity and effectiveness of the council's strategies, processes and systems. Of engagement and partnering with the Maori to give effect to the treaty. Now, we've looked at the current state and we acknowledge that a lot of work is in progress. The report provides recommendations on how the council can further develop their cultural capabilities. There were some limitations. We've only looked at the council side of things, as iwi and external stakeholders had recently participated in a survey. So we have not looked at the iwi and we've not sort of engaged with iwi and external stakeholders to assess your engagement sort of maturity. We did take an enablement focus, we say in the executive summary of the report, and by that we mean how systems and processes can support partnerships. So we've not labored the current state as much, and what you need to be successful going forward. I will get Timothy to make a few overarching comments in terms of your overall results, but I do want to say that the team has done these types of reviews in a number of other places, and we can confidently say that the council is ahead in that sort of relativity sense, which I think is overall is a great result. But I will pause there and pass it to Timothy to talk through some of the overall commentary. Tim, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, all good.
Thank you. Sorry, kia ora tātou. Building on what Benita's just shared, so we have done a number of these cultural maturity assessments, but this has been our first of a regional council, and above all has been the most positive assessment that we've undertaken. I'll just direct you to page 8 of the report, probably provides the best sort of overview around the model that we've used and where we've sort of rated based on the assessment. The assessment that was actually done last year between September and November. So the model that we've used, the Pua Waitanga, is based on something which has been developed by the former Crown Māori Relationships Agency, that being Te Arawhiti. You'll see that there's sort of five phases through that, and if I read those out, there's kākano, pakiaka, mahuri, rākau and tōtara. The diagram on page 8 illustrates where you sort of rate for each of those.
So for elected members, sorry, that's just page 56 in your agenda packs.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry, Timothy, carry on.
Right. Within the model, based on the documents that were received from WRC and the interviews that were undertaken, there being 4 individual and 3 group interview sessions, we took that information and grouped it within 3 different areas, that being people, strategy and governance. Again, looking at the diagram on page 8, you can see how that sort of features. The arrows across those 3 rows, again, people, strategy and governance, you'll see there's a dot, which is sort of current state based on our interviews and our assessment, and an arrow sort of progressing out. So the arrow sort of illustrates where we see you could probably look to grow and or extend, again, if there's interest to, within the next sort of 3 to 4 years. The recommendations which Benita touched on, 21 of which, there is a good overview on the report page that I'm looking at, which is page 10, summary of recommendations. looking at that particular diagram or table, starting with the insight statements on the left, and again tracking through those 3 time periods of 1 year, 2 to 3 years, and 3 to 4 years, with relevant recommendations noted within each of those time periods. I can briefly just sort of note, as you'll see in that diagram, again on page 10 of the report that I'm looking at, 4 sort of key insights, again, for the most positive in nature. Māori aspirations are enabled internally and activated externally. Alignment between culture, capability and organisational objectives reflects expectations to give effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. A talented and thriving workforce is supported by intentional and equitable people processes. And then the last main insight noted, Te Ao Māori strategies and objectives are part of the organisational fabric through daily processes and functions. So again, really positive. As I noted, there are 21 recommendations. As I understand, one of those has been acted on and 4 are in progress at the moment. The page which sort of follows notes the response from your management team on these recommendations. Again, to note, this is the first regional council we've done. The individuals, the teams, were fantastic to deal with, very positive. And yes, again, from our point of view and the assessments that we've done so far, this has been the most positive cultural maturity assessment. If there are any questions.
Any questions from the committee members? I've got one. Page 6 of your report, at the bottom right, you said Waikato Regional Council is the first council to be assessed using this tool. In your presentation, you said it's the first regional council. Can you give us an idea how many councils in total KPMG have assessed using this tool, please?
I couldn't say specifically off the top of my head. I can find that information and feed that through to you.
If you could, please.
Yes.
And also, you talk about in that little box, it refers to averages. Can you explain what you mean by that, please?
Yeah, so of the other cultural maturity assessments we've done, as I mentioned, for the majority private sector and also a couple of government agencies, it's looking at across those and making a bit of a judgment around, okay, where do each of those sort of feature and per average, what does that kind of look like as a gauge? That was something that was requested by management or WRC. So we've done this assessment. How does that sort of compare against other assessments that you've done? And so that's why we've included that.
Okay. So that's what you base your statement that Waikato Regional Council is so ahead of the pack, as it were.
Yeah.
Of those that we have undertaken this particular assessment of.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
So is that the only report?
I could ask, it's not so much a question for KPMG, but perhaps for Janine. Actually, no, I will say to KPMG. There's a comment in here by an interview. Actually, it's from our annual report from a year or 2 ago. It's crucial for our staff and councillors to possess the necessary skills, trainings and support to fulfil our obligations to our iwi partners, both now and in the future. And I noticed that a whole lot of the recommendations are very focused on ELT down. Did you have any views or did I miss something around councillors? Because I was part of some more cultural training at the end of last training, but this training, other than at the very start, we haven't really done much. Just wondered if you had a view on the councillors side of things as opposed to ELT and staff.
I think generically, if there is interest and council sees the benefit in engaging with Māori, then obviously looking to build that capability would be useful. I don't think it's a case of everyone needing to be highly proficient. But again, if there's an interest and commitment to, then a base level of understanding would be valuable, would be my advice and or perspective.
Might just challenge our council to have a think about the continuity throughout the training and things we offer in that space. I saw an email just recently, but of an opportunity, but it was a different time commitment to what I was able to give at the moment. But yeah, something to have a think about because it was very effective when we had Rangi Māori in at the end of last training. Yeah.
And through the chair, the report does call out some of those, I guess, environmental factors, both, nationally, in terms of policy positions and things like that, as well as the leadership within here and how that all sort of is part of the system, I guess, of how we can progress through some of it's more around the environment within which we can progress some of these recommendations and what that means for the level of maturity that we, may be able to achieve.
Yeah, I'm just wondering with something as big as like that treaty principles bill submission, I think I heard at least one councillor say, oh, it would have been really good to have a workshop on this yeah, so I think there's a bit of desire there. So maybe just think about how we might look at that. Thanks.
I can take that up in terms of council induction planning.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll mention that.
Sorry, I can respond to that question now, if you like, around who else we have undertaken this assessment with. So without giving any names, we have, as I mentioned, government agencies, private sector, I will say in the energy space, NGO, no other councils that I can see.
So have you got the number as well?
For no other councils?
No,
Of
people that you've used the tool on.
Total.
Based on the search I have here, over a dozen
No other councils.
that I can see in our management system.
Thank you. Janine, attachment 2,
Yes.
the status of actions from
Yep.
previous audits, is that prepared by management or KPMG?
No, this is prepared by staff.
Okay.
Have another comment on that once KPMG team have been able to complete their report.
Okay. Sorry. You have anything else you want to present to the committee?
No, Chair, no, nothing on this report.
Any questions? Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you for your report.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Mr. Chair, just in terms of the list of actions from previous audits,
Yep.
I think it would be stating the obvious from me that actually the list of actions is quite long that is still outstanding. And so I think that is a process that we need to work through, and, perhaps it's a way, I think with PwC, who it might be a good time to invite them to the table, if that's all right, Mr. Chair. In terms of, come on up, team, guys. In terms of sort of that induction process, we have provided previous internal audit reports to them. But I think we have, through previous cycles, actually done a review of the status of previous recommendations. And I think there's probably a bit of housekeeping that's needed in that space to actually have a really clear view on what has been done, what hasn't been done, and what the consequence of that is.
because there's, excuse me, quite a bit of slippage there.
Yeah, yeah.
So, excuse
Uh,
me,
Yes, I guess that's my acknowledgement in terms of,
Mm.
are we, are we really across what's happening? Are the accountabilities and ownership clear? But can we evidence that those actions have actually been properly closed out and responses embedded into the organisation, which I think is sort of some of the opportunity about laying the platform for the future internal audit program as well.
yeah, because they're shown as all being in progress
Yeah.
at the moment. But due dates go back over a year in many cases. I'd like to know how real that progress is, or
Yeah.
whether there is a fundamental disagreement between management and KPMG with the recommendations.
Yeah, and through the chair, I don't think there's a matter of disagreement, but I think there is a matter of priority and understanding in terms of these are, the area of the business that has been subject to the audit has been involved in reviewing the recommendations and the management comments. Now we need to go back with that accountability mindset to actually check show us what's been done so that we can confidently report through this committee on the status of all of those things, and maybe the independence through PwC. Sorry, the guys haven't heard me say this before, so this might be new, but I think just in terms of making sure that we've got a really clear pathway to build from in terms of the next stages of the internal program would seem sensible at this point in time.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I just want to build on that because I do struggle when I see in the due date ongoing.
Yeah.
And I see it a lot, especially in the asset management climate one. And so it's so hard then with the governance hat on to judge whether that has got a milestone underneath it or not, or could be ongoing forever, really. And I realize the odd one is going to be a BAU thing. But it would be nice to define that properly and have some kind of date to work with rather than, I don't actually want to see ongoing at all either. Yeah. Thank you. And totally agree with what both of you have said so far.
Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I agree with Janine. What I'd like to suggest is that these things should be reviewed, and those that are mission critical should be put on a fast track list, if you like, to make sure that they are actioned. There are other things which I see in here which I don't believe should be part of our DNA. We'll discuss them with the Chief Executive. So I think that process should be followed, and so that if there's anything which is going to be affecting higher risk for the organisation, most definitely it should be action, and the rest could be put on a nice to haves, but not essential at this stage.
Yeah, I see in the other reports, we do have a high, medium, low or significance of some kind. Could be helpful to have something like that so that when we see a data slipped, if it's a lower rating, you're not going to jump on it as much because there's a reason behind. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it can be very daunting looking at a list like this.
Yes.
Where do you start? Whereas if you've got a short list of things which have been prioritised, which you know need to be attacked, then that can be dealt with.
And I think it's all around being able to demonstrate progress, but definitely addressing the higher risk or higher impact matters is a higher priority.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh,
to the committee?
sorry, Mr. Chair, do we need to do that report
Oh.
first, and then there's a separate one in terms of
That's
the
fine.
introduction
Oh,
to the
sorry.
new team.
I thought it was all in one.
No,
I just had one quick question before, and I'm happy to second to get it going. It's just in paragraph 10 of the actual memo attached to this item, it talks about a gap between managers and team leaders regarding the provision of resources for health and safety.
yes.
I just reflect it's the first time I've heard that, and I see it here as well as in council meetings like yesterday. And it being the first time I've heard of that discrepancy, I just wanted to invite a couple of comments to add to the paragraph. From
from
do you
me.
have something to Do you know what's happening in that space to address that, or?
I don't, other than that is the survey tool that I've referenced in terms of we've seen the findings from it. So at an executive team level, we've seen the findings from it, but we haven't seen the plan to address it, which is what has been requested to come back over the next couple of weeks.
So
I
I
think
might
it's
see
a-
that come through one of the council health and safety reports or here next time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of it. I
Could
don't
we?
think it was referenced. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Thank
Because I think, you read those comments
Yeah.
and you go, oh,
Is there an issue? How big is
Yeah.
it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So it is very much, that's good feedback to have. But again, so what? What are we actually doing about that? So yeah, that's
can just
that
come back at
follow-up
some
has
point.
been
Thanks.
requested. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, then I'm done.
Can we have a mover and seconder to
Chris and
receive the
myself.
internal? Thank you, Chris. Thank
And-
you, Jennifer. All those in favour say aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Against, carried. Thank you. Slim brings us on to the Strategic Internal Audit Program. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, perhaps if I just do some
Yes.
introductions. So as the committee will be aware, through CoLab, the Regional Shared Services entity, we have recently been through a recontracting of internal audit service provision, and that has resulted in a change of providers to PwC. The committee had been provided with a copy of the terms of reference for that review through an earlier meeting. And so we've got Jade Collins and Aaron, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have a complete and utter blank because I'm sitting on the wrong page of my agenda. Aaron Steele, sorry, Aaron, from PwC. So in terms of a couple of the key lead staff who will be working with us. We've had a preliminary meeting with the team in terms of just thinking about induction, onboarding, but in light of, I guess, the council cycle that we're in at the moment as well. So a little bit of a plan laid out there in terms of some initial thinking and steps for that, and a summary of, I guess, the existing program. But probably with that overview, provide an opportunity for Jade and Aaron to do some introductions and maybe perspectives on where to from here.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jade Collins toku ingoa, and thank you, Janine. As Janine mentioned, I'll be leading the internal audit and risk services that PwC will be providing to Waikato Regional Council. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting us to join this Risk and Assurance Committee. It is really a delight to be here. Perhaps a little bit about me, and then absolutely we'll allow Aaron to introduce himself and then touch on the paper that's been shared. So I live and I've grown up in Tamaki Makaurau. I've been with PwC for coming up 18 years now, always in the internal audit and risk space, providing services to a range of public and private organisations in the strategic and operational area, including a number of local councils. And it probably would have been over a decade ago now, Mr. O'Connell, that I sat across from you with Hamilton City Council. Yeah, and so look, absolutely delighted to be here as we start our partnership with the council and ensuring that we provide comfort across those key areas or key risks that you're concerned about over the next wee while. Look, a number of, having been inducted and looking at your strategic priorities, a number of the priorities of councils are also passion areas of mine. So particularly, as was mentioned earlier around climate change adaptation and resilience to those changes, and then also iwi o Māori participation in local government decision making as well. Maybe I'll hand over to you, Aaron, and then I'll come back on the paper.
Thanks, Jade. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Aaron Steele aho. As Jade said, I'm here to support her in the delivery of strategic internal services for the Waikato Regional Council. I've been working at PwC Waikato for the last 8 years, delivering risk management and internal audit services across a range of clients and sectors. And it's great to have a client that's just down the road for us. And I look forward to working with the council, and it continues my strong connection with the local government sector, which has been spanned 25 years and started with my first job in internal audit at Auckland City Council back in year 2000. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So yeah, Janine and Fiona have shared with us the current internal audit program, so we're getting our heads across that. And of course, that desire to develop an interim plan focused on, look, what are the key priorities, what makes sense for us to focus on, which we'll work on with the team and ELT in the coming weeks. As mentioned in the paper, we do anticipate over that next sort of 12-month period, one of the key steps will be a refresh of that strategic risk profile and developing of the refreshed internal audit plan in light of those top risks and where your assurance needs actually are. So essentially our overall approach is to be really adaptable to your priorities, recognising that those may need to change over time and really keen to ensure that we're focusing on those areas that matter most, whether that be in the climate risk space as mentioned. I picked up on the comment around internal audit follow-up of actions. We're absolutely seeing that as a key area across a number of other clients as well, particularly those that have got some resource constraints around with open actions that have been there in the past, have the risk related to those reduced where some of the progress has been made and providing that comfort back to governance. So yeah, looking forward to getting started.
Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the committee. Look, just looking at the forward program, and I defer to Janine's concepts in terms of how these should be prioritised, but I'd like to swap around the 25, 26 and the 26, 27 years, because from my perspective, and it probably won't be our decision, that those items which have been scheduled for review further out, I'd like to see brought forward. And I'd just like Janine's comments on that. The reason being, we've had some business applications change and we haven't had those externally reviewed. The requirement for third-party funding that's on our agenda at the Finance Committee, and I just think it would be good to have that review done before we make commitments to change our rating, if you like, in terms of our borrowing capacity and costs. So just a thought. Decision doesn't have to be made today, but Janine, you might like to come back with some suggestions on that.
Yes, certainly that forward work program is up for discussion and debate in terms of what's going to make best sense. I guess we're sort of trying to ensure that we're progressing some priority activities over the remainder of this year so that we're still investing in this space. But then we do need to do some work in terms of what the next 12 months will look like, noting some councillor induction support and that type of as well.
Yeah, I'll just add that I'm open to the rearranging as long as there's a really good logic. Yep, like behind whatever you land on.
Yeah, and I think it's critical just to make sure that we're doing the reviews at the right time. It's not too early, it's not too late. Where's the Goldilocks moment, I guess, of, it's just right. So, yeah.
Yeah, and mindful with our budget processes that, if a review throws something up and you want to action something quick, or it leads, as Chris said, moved into something else where we're looking at rating or so, then totally makes sense. Yep.
If there are no further questions of PwC, I'd just like to say welcome. If at any time you feel you need to get in contact with me or the Deputy Chair or Paul, who's the other independent, please feel free to. This council has a very strong interest in risk and control, and it puts a lot of effort into making sure it gets value for money on that spend. So we just don't want reports. We want things to happen on a timely basis. So just bear that in mind going forward.
Noted. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Can I have a mover and seconder that we receive that report? Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jennifer. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Now we have another change with the external auditors. Welcome, Leon and Jay. Maybe if you do a
Yeah.
scene setter and then.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So obviously the report that's in front of you today is the audit management report from Audit New Zealand in relation to the 23-24 annual report. As you'll note at the end of the table, it's not Clarence. Clarence Susan, our previous appointed auditor. Is he finished up now? So almost out the door, end of the month. Yeah. In that almost space. So Clarence is off to enjoy a quieter life of retirement. And so we have Leon Peterse, who's been appointed as our new external auditor, and Jay, who's been with us for quite some time in terms of our audit manager. So we've got great continuity there. Perhaps if I just sort of provide a high-level overview in terms of the external audit. Obviously, the process for the last financial year was not on the simple end of the spectrum in terms of end-of-year audits. It was the first review that we undertook following, obviously, a major systems transformation, as well as from a WRC perspective, changes in some key staff involved in those processes as well. So overall, I think it's pleasing in terms of the way that WRC and Audit New Zealand were able to work together to achieve the outcome that is reflected in the annual report. But I think from both sides of the equation, there are opportunities for learnings and reflections, and how do we actually work together in the best way to achieve similar sorts of outcomes. I think there's some key matters called out in the report, particularly around reconciliation processes. I think we managed to land in a really pragmatic place despite the challenges that we had to effectively reflect the material impact of some of those matters within the financial statements, which was able to give confidence to the auditors. From a staff perspective, we've been working since this time to actually get on top of all of those matters and to make sure that we do have those disciplines around reconciliations and the like there. So perhaps with that, I'll hand over to Leon and Jay. Leon, I guess opportunity to introduce yourself to the committee and obviously the presentation of the report itself.
Kia ora, Janine. Tēnā koutou katoa, councillors, management staff. I'll leave the report to Jay, as I was not involved in that audit, although just having a look at it, I can see the new recommendations raised actually linked to that new systems mostly. So it's not looking too bad from my perspective. So my name is Leon Peterse. You probably can't pick it up from my accent. I wasn't born in New Zealand, but I've been here for 17 years now, all 17 years with Audit New Zealand. So I spent some time in Wellington, get inducted into public sector New Zealand, trying to understand New Zealand, then public sector New Zealand, and then they threw me in deep end, some councils in the Wairarapa. And so I've been auditing them as well, local authorities, for quite a while as well. Spent some time in Auckland, spent some time in Tauranga, back in Auckland, but I'm the Hamilton-based audit director. So for some rhyme or reason, I've never come across Waikato Regional Council, although for the last 5 or 6 years I've been on Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So I think I've got quite extensive experience in local authorities. Locally, also Hamilton City, Waikato, Waipa, Matamata, Piako, Ruapeo, Taupo. I'm missing some. But yeah, so I've been involved quite a few local authority audits. As far as the report for last year, I'll hand over to Jay.
Just bring it a bit forward as well, Jay, just so that everyone online.
Good to go. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Morning, everybody. Sure, you've seen my face before, although Clarence normally does all the talking. So yes, in terms of the report to council, and I agree with Janine's comments earlier in terms of the 23-24 audit process. Challenging definitely in terms of the info system and the complexities that we weren't anticipating. The other aspects of the audit, just looking at the report in front of me in terms of management override, investment fund, fair value assessment of property, plant and equipment, those aspects, a lot of it was as expected, as anticipated, no issues in those areas. Our biggest challenge, yes, was the info system and things that we were not anticipating or that took longer to resolve, is things like reconciliations and cash especially. There was quite a bit of back and forth. The management team, Janine's team, and also corporate planning team worked really well with us to get to the bottom of the issues and work with pragmatic solutions and how to get to the end line without it, dragging on endlessly. Definitely some lessons learned, and it's not only you, it's also us as well. It's us saying, okay, where do we need to be more efficient going forward, and factoring that into this year's audit as well. But if there's any questions on the report.
Chris.
And thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess this question is directed both at Janine and at our external auditors, that the first two items on the list are of real concern to me. Controls for general ledger reconciliations and bank reconciliations are really basic controls in any system. And I recall sitting here probably 18 months, or it was after Infor had gone live, and I did ask, and government auditors were in the room, and I did ask that you specifically review two issues. One was the transfer of balances, and you don't have to wait till the end of the year. My concern is that this appears to be picked up at the end of the year, so we've had all the period that Infor's been running where these systems and the controls have not been functioning. I had asked that specifically that key controls be checked at an early stage in that financial year, and that the balance carried forward from the old system to the new system had been correctly verified. It would appear to me that that wasn't done. Now, that's between Janine and the external auditors. But as a member of the risk committee, it's disappointing to find out now that work had not been carried out on a timely basis. So I know it's history, but it's just, as an external auditor, it's one of the things that I always used to make sure if you've got a change in system, you've got to make sure the controls carry forward and the balances are carried forward correctly. No, I'll leave it there. So Janine, can I just ask, these things are now firmly under control and reconciliation is being done on a timely basis?
Yeah, look, a continuous work on in terms of it is an absolute priority and a not negotiable from my perspective. It is translating that into actually seeing that stick throughout the team and in a consistent manner. So there's been some communication in anticipation of this meeting and again this morning in terms of being really clear on my expectations to make sure that that's happening. I think in terms of the bank rec, can we call it a feature of Infor? There is some complexity around the integration of two different accounts receivables modules, one being for rating and one being for other debt, and how those transactions coming to and from the bank have been handled. So there is a change that is currently happening to try and simplify that and eliminate some additional debits and credits that were being created that actually just netted each other off and added no value but added complexity. I think it's more intensive around some of those processes than what we have had previously. So once we've got this integration sorted, the next step will be to look at, auto reconciliation functions. How much of it can you actually just clear through general rules? I mean, that's how the process should work. So you're dealing with exceptions rather than everything. So some continuing to be some work-ons on that space, but I think we're very clear on what that needs to be now.
Thank you.
On page 120, the external auditors said that they did check the data migration.
That would have been a key check in terms of that opening balances.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, so part of our process was checking that the closing balances from the old Oracle system did transfer correctly to the new system. So we didn't have any concerns from that perspective.
What was, I see none of these had a surplus impact. They were just balance sheet disclosures, really. What was your materiality that you were working to with this audit so far as the balance sheet was concerned? You used to put it in your report, now don't.
It's in the audit plan. It'll be so the materiality is set out in the plan rather than the report.
Yeah, it's usually in our audit plan. I've got this year's one in front
Yeah.
of me. I don't know, but it'll be quite similar. So this year's for this materiality, for the balance sheet, which is 86 million, but that's more focused on revaluations and fair value assessments. For the rest of the account balances and transactions, for this year, it's 5.9 million.
Yeah.
So last year's would have been similar.
So that gives the committee some useful context then for your schedule differences. Yeah.
Yeah, and so noting on page 138 of the agenda is the misstatements, which includes, I think, the residual in terms of those movements that we put through the balance sheet.
Yeah, it must have been.
Yeah. It's the corrected misstatements here.
Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
Oh, sorry. Very well. No, thanks, Chris, for raising that one, because it's a really important one. And from what I hear from you, Janine, there may be a couple of people who are not putting it as high on their list as you would like them. Yet I hope that our CE is supporting you entirely to make sure that that will be on top of the
and
list.
look, it's within my direct reports, and so I need to ensure that that's happening.
Awesome. So there's no barriers there. I've got a question around on page 134, and it's quite minor, but it's where it references CoLab and RSHL's annual reports not being on their websites, and it's just I like to sometimes focus on the little things because they show a trend in relationships sometimes. So question, I see we're resolving it by putting it on our website to help close that out, but is there any kind of delay or non-responsiveness of CoLab or RSHL not helping us close this out? Or because I mean, obviously the next one wasn't published, and so while it was fixed maybe one year, it didn't then become a systemic fix for the following year, and it kind of got picked up again. Just wondering, is there something there that?
Well, so through the chair, I guess we are reliant on those CCO annual reports completing their audit process, which
Right. That might factor in.
I know in the case of RSHL, there was some delays
Right.
around closing those out due to some revenue recognition considerations. And obviously through the COVID period, CCOs were lower down in the priority in terms of auditing. But once we have them, like I say, it's the comment notes, the agreement is generally that the CCOs will publish those and we can reference to that. To try and close this out, we'll put them up on our website as well.
Yeah, it just makes it easier. No, that's cool. And then the last one was there was legal title document, construction land assets, and I just know there's no progress made on this issue, but it's old. Just wondering if there's any commentary you want to provide. It's not in the report.
Yes, nothing current that probably I can comment on. I know this has been looked at since it was first raised, and understanding the issues behind it. So we can come back with and
Does this speak to how you opened this item with, you know, if we have the prioritization and yeah, cool.
yes, but what we need to be doing with this committee is providing regular updates on these outstanding matters as well, in between getting the formal reporting through from New Zealand. So.
Thank you.
Leon, I'll make the same comment to you and Jay that I made to the internal auditors, which you would have heard. This council takes the risk and control functions seriously and seeks to get value for money out of all its assurance activities. So if at any time you think you need to access myself or the deputy chair or the other independent, you have free range. And because we do, you know, this is not just a box ticking exercise. It's very much, we have got a good council and we want to keep it that way. And if there are no further questions, I would suggest I'd like to have I want us to have a committee only time session with you. Just be short, but I think we can do it in conjunction with an early break.
Excellent.
Paul.
I've just been sitting quietly, so support your comments, Chris and Jennifer. I'm allowed to make the geeky comment. I think it's valid if a piece of equipment's taken offline, maybe refurbished and put on the shelf as a spare, it's appropriate to treat it as inventory if you wish to. I think the council has to make that decision, but if you chose that, I'd support it.
I'm sure Chris will as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll staff can leave the room and we will leave you to have some committee only time.
Yep. And then break. I don't think we'll be too long in committee only time. So if we say back here at 2:45. Okay. And just before you go, we have a mover and seconder to see that report, please. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chris. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So, no, we're not going, Chris. We're going to have committee only time. Sorry.